Today we're going to be talking about lesson 7.1, which is all about preparing an income statement. If you have not already done so, make sure you either open your notes in Notability or go ahead and print them, and you should be filling them out as you watch along. The first thing we're going to go through is this flow chart of accounts again. So remember, this is taking a look at the entire accounting cycle and what we've done up to this point. The very first thing we learned how to do was to put our transaction entries into a journal, and we did that by separating each one into debit and credit. From the journal, we took the time to create a chart of accounts, and we were listing all of our accounts in a specific order. Once we had the chart of accounts where we had all of our account numbers and our account titles, we could start taking the information that was put in our journal and posting that to the individual general ledgers for each account. From the general ledger, we took the balances and we created the worksheet, again listing all of our accounts and then listing out the balances. And then there were also two columns on there, the balance sheet and the income statement, which leads us into the very last box, and that's what we're doing in Chapter 7. We're making two sets of financial statements. We will be creating the balance sheet, which is one type of financial statement, and in today's lesson 7.1, we're going to be creating the income statement. So we have, again, just trying to sink this into your brain, two types of financial statements, the last part of our accounting cycle. We've got the balance sheet, and we've got the income statement. Again, all that information is going to be found from the box previous to our current box on the accounting cycle. So if I go back, we're working on this financial statements box. So if I take a look at the box right before this, it is the worksheet. So all of that information is going to come from the worksheet. And we have two vocab words that I want you to include in your Quizlet. The first is adequate disclosure. And this relates to financial statements because when we create our financial statements, we need to make sure that they contain or they tell us, aka disclose, specific, in this case adequate, information. And so adequate disclosure, again, is making sure that that balance sheet and income statement, both financial statements, are disclosing adequate or specific information. The second thing we need to know about creating financial statements is this concept of what's called a going concern. So we prepare financial statements with the expectation that our business is going to be open, aka keep going forever. So this is what an income statement looks like. It's what we're going to be creating. So the first thing that we are going to take a look at is a breakdown of that information on the worksheet. So again, when we look at the worksheet, we had that imaginary line that went across an income summary, which is cut out of this picture. But again, you can imagine that line here. And when we look at the income statement column, it contains all of the accounts below that income summary line. And if we break this down even further, the two different types of accounts we have are our revenue accounts, which in this case is just sales, and then we also have our expense accounts. The last thing that's reported in the income statement column, if I look at the numbers or I look at the account titles and what's left, is either our net income or if we have a net loss, it would be our net loss. So all this information from the worksheet needs to make its way onto the actual income statement. So the first thing we're going to start with on our income statement is the heading. Very, very similar to the worksheet. The first thing we're going to write is our company name. The second thing we're going to write is what type of report are we doing? Well, we are not making a worksheet. So in this case, we're making an income statement. We're going to write the words income statement. When we make a balance sheet, we're going to write the words balance sheet. All right, the final thing that we're going to write is whatever time period we're using. In this case, we always do the same thing that we did for the worksheet. So we do 4 month ended, and then whatever month we're at the end of. Once we have the heading of our income statement, we're actually ready to fill in the bottom of the income statement. So the first thing I need you to write down is basically the first thing that we come across when we look at this worksheet, And I've cut it apart just a little so you can see just the income statement portion of the worksheet. So the very first thing I see is sales. But before I can write sales, I need to say what type of account this is. So I'm going to write the revenue heading as my very first thing. So I'm going to write revenue and put a colon there. Then I'm going to list any type of revenue account and amounts that I have. And in this case, I only have one revenue account, and that is sales. So I'm going to write that slightly indented. I'm going to write sales. And now I want us to take a look at how this income statement is divided. On the worksheet, it's divided in a debit and credit column. On the income statement, there is no heading there that says debit or credit. Instead, we're going to imagine this. The left column is individual amounts, and the right column is going to be total amounts. Now, in this case, we only have one revenue account. So rather than write the individual amount and then rewrite the total amount in both columns, we're going to skip writing it in the individual amount column and just place it into the total amount column, since all of our revenue is the total amount of sales. So I'm going to take the total sales amount, which if I look on my worksheet is $3,565, and I'm going to copy that over to the total column here, $3,565. I'm done with my revenue types. So the next thing I have are all expenses. So I'm going to put the expense heading on my income statement. So I'm going to write expenses with a colon, and then I'm going to list out every single expense account and the amount. So the first expense account I see is advertising expense. So I'm going to copy that over, indented slightly. And then because I have multiple expenses, I'm going to list each one individually in the individual column. So advertising expenses individual amount was $213, so I'm going to place it individually, 2013. The next thing I have is insurance expense. I'm going to write insurance expense. That individual amount in the individual column, 100, 100. Miscellaneous expense. I'm going to take the individual 28, put it individually 28. Rent expense, 300 to 300. Supplies expense, 715 to 715. Utilities expense, 110 to 110. I have multiple expenses, so I'm actually going to do one more thing here, and I'm going to write total expenses, and this will be still right underneath all of my expense accounts. So I'm going to write total expenses, and then I'm going to total up all of these numbers in the individual column. Now I could re-add these again if I wanted to with the calculator, or I could realize that I've already added the total expense column on the worksheet, and it's this 1466 number right here. So I can just copy that over, and because it's a total, I need to put it in the total column, which is the right column. So 1466 is my total. I'm going to put it in the right or the total column, 1466. Okay, if I look back at my worksheet, the only number that I don't have accounted for yet is my net income. So you would put your net income or your net loss next. In this case, we have a net income, so I'd write net income. And then again, this doesn't have individual amounts, it just has one total net income amount. So I'm going to take that total of $2,099 for my net income and put it in the total column, which is the right column. I'm going to write that $2,099. If I had had a net loss, it would look the same. I'm just going to show you down here. I would write net loss because it's what I had. And again, I would take that number, whatever my net loss was, and it's a total, so I'd put it in the right-hand column, except this time I would put it in parentheses because in accounting, negative numbers are shown in parentheses. So it's still placed in the same exact spot as it would be if it was an income. The only difference is I would put it in parentheses and I would use the word loss instead of income. If you finish listing out the revenue heading, the types of revenue, the expense heading, the types of expense accounts, all the amounts, and then if you have multiple expense accounts, you have to do that total expenses, and then you have your net income or net loss. If you've done all of that, the last thing you just have to do is make sure you've ruled. And you can see that's already done in this income statement for you. There's a single rule underneath all of the single advertising expense individual ones because we totaled that. And then there's a single ruled line underneath total expense because technically I'm doing my math in this straight line of 3,565 minus my expenses, 1,466 means I would have a net income of 2,099. So this is just a straight math problem down here on the right, and if those expenses plus that income equaled the sales, I would double rule it to show that I'm right. The last thing we have to fill out on our income statement is this column over here that says percentage of sales. Now what this is another vocabulary word for you to add to your Quizlet, and it is something called a component percentage. So in this case, the component I'm looking at is sales because it says sales, but you could have advertising expense component, but we're going to look at the sales component for our income statement. And what that is taking a look at the percentage of the actual financial statement and the total and comparing those two. So if I'm finding the percent of sales component percentage for a revenue account, what I'm doing is I'm taking my total sales number and I'm dividing it by whatever the component percentage I'm trying to find is. So I'm trying to find the percentage of sales. So I'm taking sales divided by sales. So if I took my total sales, which if I look at my totals column, I've got 3,565, and I divided it by whatever the component percentage I'm trying to find is. Again, I'm trying to find sales, so I'm going to divide it by the total sales. I'm dividing it by 3,565. I hit equals, I get 1. I have to change this into a percentage because it says percentage of sales. So I'm going to take that and I'm going to multiply it by 100 because 100 is the highest percent I can get on a test. So I'm going to take this and I'm going to write down 100.0. I'm always going to round to that 100th place. The next thing I want to look down is the next total that I have. So the next total I have is total expenses. So I'm going to take my total expenses and again, divide it by whatever the component percentage I'm trying to find. I'm trying to find the percentage of sales, so I'm going to divide it by my sales number. So what I would do mathematically here is I'd take my total expenses, 1,466, I divide it by my total sales, 3,565, and I get 0.41122, blah, blah, blah. I have to change this into a percentage. So multiply it by 100, and I get 41.1. I'm always going to round to that nearest 100th. So if I go back over here, I'm going to write in 41.1 next to my total expenses. When I look at either my net income or my net loss, I would take that total of whatever's in that net column and divide it by the component percentage, so percentage of sales. If I went over to my calculator, I would be taking the total net, which is 2,099, dividing it by the total sales, 3,565. And I have, again, a decimal that I need to convert into a percentage because it's a component percentage, so times 100. And I get 58 point, and now I need to round because I have 87, so I'm going to round this up to 0.9. So 58.9. Now, a way for you to double check this is whatever percentage that you're finding, so in this case, I'm finding the percentage of sales. Sales should be 100%. If I was finding the percentage of expenses, expenses would be 100%. Whichever two you're not finding, so in this case, I'm not finding total expenses percentage, I'm not finding the net income percentage, I would take those two and together they should add up to 100. So in this case, if I looked at my expense percentage of 41.1 and my net income percentage of 58.9, those should equal the 100% that I have of sales. So if I took 41.1 plus 58.9, I do get 100. And that is what a full income statement will look like. We've got our heading, we've got all our accounts and our amounts, and then we filled out our component percentage column. Here is an income statement that actually has multiple sources of revenue and a net loss. So before we were only dealing with one type of sales, so we got to dump it into the totals column right away. In this case, there are two types of sales, so it looks exactly how we did our expenses before. We listed the individual types of sales, and then we had the separate total revenue line, and the total got dumped in the total column on the right. Expenses looks exactly the same as how we were doing it. Again, with a net loss, we still put the total amount in the right total column, but anytime it's a loss or a negative number, we put it in parentheses. So you're going to see the component percentage would also be negative because you would have to take 123.7 minus 23.7, and that would equal out to get your 100%. So you should have added those three terms to your Quizlet. And once you've done that, we're going to head over to Aplia and do the working together. So you can start by opening up your instructions in the separate window, and I'll just pull them up over here. And it's telling us that we're going to be creating an income statement for the month ended July 31st. And it does tell us that we are using Darlene's delivery service. And then if we expand our instructions, it's going to give us the partial worksheet instead of making us look at the full thing. Again, it's cropped it so we just see that income statement column. The first thing we want to fill out is our heading. On our first line, we do our company name, which in the instructions it says Darlene's, so we'll put Darlene's. We are making an income statement, so we're going to put income statement. And our last item is our date, and so it says for the month of July 31st, we will do for month ended July 31st. Now we're going to be listing out all the accounts on our income statement column from the worksheet. So the first type of account we get to is sales. Before I write sales, I need to define that account type. Sales is a type of revenue, so I'm going to put revenue. And then I get to list all of the revenue account titles. So I have sales as my revenue account title. And after sales, there's nothing left. So I can just take this, since it's a single one amount, I'm going to drop the number into that totals column. So I'm going to go to the right column, which is my total column. And I'm going to dump the sales number of 5511, 5511. Okay. The next type of accounts we have are all expense accounts. So I'm going to give the expense account title heading over here. And then I'm going to list each individual expense account. So I'm going to list advertising expense, insurance expense, miscellaneous expense, and then I have supplies expense. Because I have multiple ones, I'm going to put them in the individual column on the left. So my advertising was 821, insurance 300, miscellaneous 347, and supplies was 713. Rather than pull out a calculator and add all these together, I'm going to use the total that I already had figured from the income statement totals column. And again, totals go in the right. So under the total expenses on the right hand side, I'm going to take the total on the worksheet, 2,181, and place it there. The last thing I have left to do on that worksheet is net income. If it's only one, it goes directly to the totals column. So I only have one net income. I'm going to drop the net income into the total column. My net income is $3,330. And I've got everything filled out except for my component percentage of sales. Now in the worksheet instructions, it does tell us that we should be rounding to the nearest 100th of a percent. So I'm finding it of sales, so I'm always going to take whatever the total number is and divide it by sales. So here I'm taking this total, I'm taking total as 5511, divide it by the total sales, which is 5511, and then I have to convert it to a percentage, so I have to multiply by 100. So I get 100%, and then I'm rounding to the nearest hundredth, so I need to put a 0.0 in there, so it shows that 100th place value. The next total I come across is my expenses. So I'm going to take 2181. I'm taking that total and I'm dividing it by the component percentage I'm trying to find. I'm trying to find sales. So divided by 5511, my sales number, and multiply that by 100 to convert it to percentage, and I get 39.6 if I'm rounding up. So 39.6. And my final total number, 3330, divided by, again, the total number of sales, so 5511, and multiplying by 100 to convert to percents, and I get 60.4 if I round, 60.4. And again, I can double check this. I can take my two numbers, and they should, 39.6 plus 60.4 should equal that 100% of sales. So if you check your answer, that should take you through the working together. At this point, you're going to want to do the 7-1 on your own, the 7-1 application problem, both located on Applia, and then head on over to Schoology and finish out the 7-1 EOLR.